Educating, empowering, and inspiring you to live healthier is our mission. So let's begin. Hey, health warriors. This is episode number 82 of the Life, Strength, and Health podcast. I'm Kim and I'm joined with Jamal.
Greetings, everyone.
And
peace and blessings.
Yes. And thank you for joining us this week. In this week's episode, this is the final part of a 3-part series of an interview we did with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. And it was all on the Fertility Awareness Method. And the interview was packed with so much information that we just released it over 3 episodes because there was so much information that Lisa shared, so much powerful information. And that's why we, spread it out over 3 episodes. And this is part 3 of that interview.
Yeah, so far we're getting some really good feedback. People are really enjoying it. We enjoy doing it. Really good interview. So you're going to love part 3. If you didn't get a chance to check out part 2, you definitely want to go back and check those out first.
Yes, and that was episode number 80 and 81. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you check them out, and you can access those episodes at lifestrengthandhealth.com/80 and also /81. But before we dive into the final part of the interview, let's talk about this week's organic food for thought. And this week's organic food for thought is all on organic fruits and vegetables.
Yes, we always get a lot of questions when it comes to organic foods. And one of the main complaints that we get is the price, like organic food versus conventional food. And although prices are getting better depending on what season it is, they still can be pricey. So we wanted to go through some foods that you absolutely need to get organic, but there's also some foods that the pesticides are really low. They're not treated, and there's not a big difference. So you don't have to get them organic. The number one thing that you absolutely should get organic are apples. Apples are very watery, and they are full of toxins that they use as far as pesticides and herbicides. So you definitely want to avoid non-organic apples. You know that they're waxed, and that's all about appearance. So you definitely want to avoid apples. The number 2 thing is celery. Celery is another very watery vegetable. So it pulls up those pesticides that are in the soil and highly toxic. So you definitely want to avoid conventional celery. You always want to make sure that you're getting organic celery. And the third thing is strawberries, another very watery fruit full of pesticides, the conventional ones. So the top 3 that should always be organic are apples, celery, and strawberries. And then when it comes to food that is very little to no pesticides that are very close to their organic counterparts are onions. And then the next thing is pineapples, which is great because I love pineapples and it's hard to find organic pineapples. Like we luck up and find one every now and then. And,
right.
And when I tell you it's like quadruple the price, I am not exaggerating. You will easily spend $10, $12 for an organic pineapple, but as they come into season, you can get a conventional one for a couple dollars, and it's perfectly safe to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing, which is one of my favorite foods,
right?
Avocado, right? Avocados, the conventional avocados can be pricey depending on the type of year. I mean, honestly, they're pricey all year round at this point. But you don't have to rush to get organic avocado. Totally safe, totally fine to get conventional, which is definitely what we do most of the time. And it tastes just as good as well. So those are the top 3 that you should always get organic, as well as the top 3 that they don't necessarily have to be organic.
Right. So now let's segue into this week's episode, which is the conclusion of our interview with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack, all on discussing the Fertility Awareness Method. And I just wanted to give you a heads up towards the latter part of this interview. We had a little audio complication, as we mentioned in episode 1 of the beginning part of the interview. Lisa is from Toronto, and just with technology, sometimes things don't work out as you plan. So I would say like the last minute or maybe 30 seconds, the audio gets a little choppy, but 98% of this interview is crystal clear. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. So without further ado, here is the conclusion of our interview with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack discussing the Fertility Awareness Method.
We get a lot of, or we're seeing a lot more women that are struggling with infertility. Would you say that it's less infertility in a lot of cases and more of them just not understanding, their cycles and not working with their cycles properly as far as like what's going on right now?
Well, I think that, infertility is really complicated.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't want anyone to leave this podcast thinking like, oh, it's just super simple. I just have to. Infertility is a real significant, very complicated issue. And there are so many different factors that play a role. So in our society, of course, because as women, we carry the babies. And so we assume that it's us. Male factor for infertility is anywhere from 40 to 50%.
Yeah, wow. That's pretty high. Wow.
Yeah, like there's been a gradual, like it's documented in literature. You can kind of like it's a real thing, but there's a lot of population studies, and over the years, there's a very distinct difference in a male's sperm count, quality, all of those different factors that determine a normal sperm situation. If you were to look 50 to 60 years ago in the literature, your average man then had way more than twice the sperm quality of the average man now. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say that, this is the only factor and it's magical. And so it's not, no, because infertility is complicated. But what I can say is that, yes, there are people out there who, if they were timing sex correctly, they would get pregnant. Like there are people. I've worked with women in those situations where. So the thing about it is from so let's say that you're struggling with infertility and you come to me and you tell me, Lisa, I've been trying to conceive for 2 years. And then, of course, I get into them all up in your business. I want to know what's happening in your menstrual cycle charts. I want to know what your cycles are like. And I also want to know when you're having the sex, because I need to know that, because this is what I do. We need to know that we're timing the sex correctly. I have to know that you understand the method and that you know which days are fertile and not. So I get into all of your business. And so then in the midst of our conversation, you tell me that your partner travels a lot and that you travel a lot for work as well. And then when we get down to what's been going on in the last year, it turns out that there's only been like one cycle when you were both in the city at the right time in your cycle. Mm. So in your mind, I've been trying to conceive for a year or two, but I'm looking at it and saying, no, actually you only tried in October.
Wow. Mm. Yeah.
So there is some of that, definitely.
Wow. Yeah, that's this is important. That'd be an important thing to know. So you really haven't been, in this case, you haven't really been trying for 2 years. You've just tried once.
You've actually been actively avoiding pregnancy, but you just didn't know. Like, you didn't know you were using the fertility awareness method for birth control. Like,
and then you end up going down this slippery slope, because then you start saying, "What's wrong with me?" And mentally, it just, yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, like when we started our conversation, we were all taught that you can get pregnant every day of your cycle. Now that information is inaccurate, and it's potentially damaging, because then as women, like, it's damaging for a few reasons. So one reason it's damaging is because I feel like a lot of women, not all women, but a lot of women would make different choices with regards to their birth control methods if they knew that there was only about a week out of their cycle that they could conceive. So for me, that's definitely true. Now, it's not true for everybody, but for me, it's definitely true. I know, oh, wow, there's only a week that I can get pregnant every cycle. Well, then why am I taking a drug every day?
Right.
Now that logic makes sense to me. And there's a certain percentage of women for whom that makes sense as well. And so then the other issue is that we're taught basically that because we can get fertile every day, we're kind of taught that this fertility thing is a given. And so I've spoken to a lot of women who went on birth control when they were 20 because they were taught that they get pregnant every time. And now they're 30 and it hasn't occurred to them that maybe they're not, like maybe the fertility has changed. Like you're 10 years older now.
Right.
Right. So the other thing is that it does not inform us about how our fertility changes with age. And so there's I see there to be a very real issue going on. So, one of the questions that I wanted to explore further was, does hormonal birth control affect fertility negatively? And so what I found in the work that I do and in the research that I've done is that the research doesn't support the idea that the pill kind of permanently messes with your fertility. The research doesn't support that. But what the research does show is that for women who take hormonal birth control, depending on the type, but there's a lot of different types and a lot of them affect the fertility in different ways. But there is a temporary delay in the return of your normal fertility when you take hormonal birth control. So, for instance, women who take the pill long term, when they come off of it, statistically speaking, based on the research, it takes twice as long to conceive. A woman coming off of the Depo shot, well, statistically speaking, it's 4 times as long. Wow. The Depo shot is in a category of its own. Yeah. But that's something that women need to know. It's very, very, very important, and it's something that we don't know. And then add to that the fact that if you've taken hormonal birth control for 10, 15 years, you're also 10 or 15 years older than you were when you got on it. Right? Like we're not taking these things into consideration because we're not taught to. And so the way I see it is that when a woman is not informed that there is this temporary delay, what that looks like from my perspective, when I work with women who have just come off of the pill and we're charting their cycle, or she's charting her cycles and we're working together, you can see on her chart the signs of this kind of like her cycles don't fall into the normal parameters, and it typically takes 9 to 12 cycles, statistically speaking, before it would be indistinguishable. Like before you would look at a woman who's never been on the birth control and you look at a woman who came off of it, like their cycles won't look about the same statistically for 9 to 12 months. So there's a very real issue. So then if you follow with that, like what that means for your average woman who's 34 years old and she just went off of the pill today because her and her husband are ready to get pregnant. She may have even gone to her doctor and said, like, my husband and I are planning to get pregnant. Should I go off the pill early? To which most doctors say no. There's no point. And so then she starts trying to get pregnant. And of course she says things like, well, we're just going to start trying. And I'm not really, if it happens, it happens. People say stuff like that. But what they mean is that I've been taught my whole life that I'm going to get pregnant the minute I have sex. And so I might be playing it cool, but if I'm not pregnant within 2 months, I'm going to lose my,
right.
That's what it means. Like, right. And so, because you see that. And so then, okay, it's January, I come off the pill. Now it's February. Now it's March. I'm freaking out. I'm already going to my fertility specialist, and now it's like April. Statistically speaking, there's one study that was done, and it was like women who had not been on any hormones, women who had been on the pill, and then it compared like the shot to a few different types of hormonal birth control. So the women who didn't take, like they were using condoms or the cervical cap, so they weren't using any hormones. On average, it took them 4 months. So we're talking just normal people. It takes an average of 4 months. Like I shouldn't say normal, but like not on the hormones. Right. The women who came off the pill, it was an average of 8 months. Mm-hmm. And so, but the thing is that like if you know that ahead of time,
right,
like you could just
that changes
like
things.
Yeah, like so if you and your partner know that you're planning to have kids next year, you could just come off of it this year.
Right.
Right.
And then you don't have the
perfect
stress.
Sense. So are you saying that with Depo then it could easily take over a year?
It was an average of 16 months.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was it's a whole different thing. It's a whole different situation. Yeah. It's known to suppress. It's a whole different kettle of fish. So, I mean, I would just say do the research.
Well, you had a powerful episode on Depo. I'm going to link that in the show notes pages. You know, I took it, oh gosh, like 15 years ago. I took it for 2 months and I just came into consciousness of like being connected with my body and my health. So I got off of it, but it took like 6 months for my cycle to come back. And I was freaking out. I was like, this isn't normal. I'm so grateful that I was only on it for 2 months. But yes, that episode, I'm going to link in the show notes pages.
The dangers of Depo. There's a woman, a fellow Canadian. She wrote a book called The Dangers of Depo. So her experience is very negative. Like she had a very, very negative experience on Depo. But I think it's important for her to be like, she is a woman and she had an experience. And I think it's important to share it because she's not alone. Right. And even if you don't have an experience that's as severe, statistically speaking, according to that study, 16 months was the average. Wow. The average that it took these women to conceive. And then if you go into like fertility awareness, educator, like because what I see is I've seen thousands of charts. And when I say chart, I mean like the record of women's menstrual cycles. I've seen thousands of them. And so you can see there's a very clear difference between what happens when a woman comes off of hormonal birth control. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't come off of the pill and get pregnant right away. Like it doesn't mean that. Some people come off the pill and they get pregnant. Like we all know this. Yes. But we're talking about statistically. And what I think it's the same thing as buying insurance. Like I don't think anything's going to happen in my house, but I still get insurance because you just want to be like, I'd like to, if you want to avoid, so for me, I'm always kind of wanting to avoid additional procedures. Like I don't really like the idea of surgery. If I needed it, fine, but I'm not going to I'm going to try to do everything I can ahead of time to avoid that option. Right. So if I'm trying to avoid IVF, for example, like if I need it, I'm so happy and fortunate to live in a time that it is there. Right. But I'm still going to try to stack the odds in my favor. So knowing what I know about hormonal birth control, I know that there's a temporary delay. The research does not support that the pill prevents people from getting pregnant. There are some women who come off of hormonal birth control and don't get their periods back 4 years. So that is a real thing. And some women experience that. But what the research shows is that if you had issues beforehand, so for instance, like if you were put on the pill because you never got your period, or because your period only came 4 times a year, or because you had ovulatory issues, you're more likely to have that type of reaction.
I just had a question as far as just from a nutritional perspective. Like, have you seen that there's some things that women can do on a positive side and a negative side to, have a major impact on fertility? Well,
absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of the great thing about living in the time we live in is that there is a lot of research. I think it's really fascinating because we can have you can actually look to see what works and what doesn't work. And so what a woman needs to have healthy menstrual cycles, I mean, there's a lot of nutrients that we require. What I always say to my clients, especially my clients that are trying to conceive, is that we don't really think about how critical a time it is, like the time in your life when you're having babies. So having a baby, that is the time of your life when you will require the most nutrition that you ever will. So for those years when you are pregnant and or breastfeeding, your nutritional requirements for those years are extremely high. And it won't come as a surprise that the same nutrients that you require to make a healthy baby and to keep yourself healthy during that time are the same nutrients that you need for an optimal menstrual cycle and healthy fertility. And so basically what we need are nutrients that are going to support hormone production. We need to ensure that you have a healthy gut so that you can actually digest and absorb the nutrients that you're consuming. And in order to produce hormones, in order to optimize your fertility, in order to ensure that you have healthy ovulatory function, I mean, we're looking at animal fats, and I think that's it's really interesting because the hormones that we need for a healthy menstrual cycle, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of those are steroid hormones, and in order to produce steroid hormones, the precursor to all steroid hormones is cholesterol.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And cholesterol only comes from animal foods. And so it's not to say we can't make cholesterol. Our liver can make cholesterol, but our liver does everything. Our liver is constantly filtering our blood. It's storing nutrients, like it's doing all kinds of stuff. And so if you're not consuming the raw materials that you require to make the hormones, then you're putting an additional burden on your liver to do that. In addition to that, there's a lot of different key nutrients that play an important role in fertility. And I mean, I could go on about it, but I would say that if you're really interested in terms of the diet that you would require, what nutrients that you would need, I look at it from an ancestral perspective because there's a lot of research to support that. So I'm really inspired by the work of Dr. Weston Price. And what he did was he explored the world and looked into the diets of traditional cultures. And he was inspired because he noticed that in the industrialized world, a lot of the people in the industrialized world had like crowded teeth, like in cavities and all this stuff, whereas he'd go into the middle of nowhere into a traditional culture that's quote unquote primitive, as that's how we talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And yet still they would have like, they're not even brushing their teeth, and they would have like perfect teeth, no cavities, great bone structure, and they wouldn't have fertility issues. And so he found a few things that were really interesting. And I think the most interesting and fascinating thing about that is that many of these traditional cultures had specific diets that they would feed to the men and women before they were married, before they were having children, those types of things. And it was very important that they would, important enough that they would feed these diets 6 months before they were conceiving. And the types of foods that they were consuming were, organ meats, liver and organ meats. They were consuming, fish eggs, different, there was just specific foods that were key to fertility. And if you look at the research, you can see how critical a role that the nutrients in those foods play in fertility. So vitamin A, for instance, like vitamin A that comes from animals. So not the same vitamin A that we get from carrots, but the vitamin A that we would get from liver or cod liver oil. There's research that shows that if you were to deprive an animal of vitamin A, it loses its ability to reproduce.
Yes.
Like the rat, like there was the rat study I was looking at, and they stopped, they no longer had the ability to produce sperm. And then when they put the vitamin A back, then they were able to produce sperm again. It was like,
I actually saw, I was looking at it. I was looking at that. It was mind blowing to see that. Yeah. I think they, didn't they like eat each other's, and that's they ate each other's eyes out or something like that, just to try to get the vitamin A that they needed. Was that were you reading the same thing?
Well, we may have been looking at a different study.
Okay.
I don't know about that study.
Like the rat cannibalism. But what was interesting is that in the studies that I was looking at, like it's very clear that when they deprive these animals of vitamin A, like what happens if you take a rat and you deprive it of vitamin A is it becomes blind, because retina, like we need it to see. Yes. It becomes blind and infertile, essentially. And you can do that. Like you can reliably create that result by depriving them of retinol. So that's just one example of the foods that we need that are critical to fertility. And I think for a lot of women, we are living in a time where we grew up hearing that eating fat is bad and it's going to make us fat and all that stuff. And it turns out that not only is the fat critical for our hormone production, but it also contains important nutrients that we require in order to have healthy fertility, healthy menstrual cycles. So a big part of the nutrition, is just having a good understanding of what nutrients that we do need to have a healthy menstrual cycle, and starting there. And it really comes down to whole foods, not processed foods, but it does include the research supports the incorporation of animal fats, organ meats, and fish. And then for vegetarians and vegans, it's a little bit more challenging. But for vegetarians, eggs and dairy products, if you're able to consume those, become really important foods because they contain a lot of key nutrients that we need for fertility. So it's a pretty big conversation, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I know it is. But I do think it's important, at least just to give an overview so that, people can make that connection that what you put in your body is going to have an effect on not just your health, but your fertility overall. And we actually did a 3-part episode on fats in general, just because they're so villainized, and we're really just seeing the connection between certain nutrients, fertility, and fats. So, right now it's just such a huge trend with, veganism and things like that. Do you think that, from a fertility perspective, that, that's going to, or could possibly get a lot of, women in trouble when it comes to, fertility and reproduction?
Well, what makes my kind of position a little bit differently is that for me, it comes back to what we're seeing in your menstrual cycle.
Right.
The menstrual cycle doesn't lie. So, if I was working with a client and, she doesn't incorporate any animal products at all, and her menstrual cycle is completely healthy, she doesn't have any issues or challenges or anything. We've done a full nutrient panel. She does not have any nutrient deficiencies. She does not have any symptoms at all. Basically like health issues, then, great. But in my experience, when I'm working with clients who, have restricted their animal consumption or are not eating, and even clients who do eat animals, but perhaps have not optimized their diet. So,
yes.
Potentially still eating lots of processed foods and not really getting the nutrition. Like, a calorie is not a calorie. Right. It really depends. So basically what I'm saying to you is that, what the research shows is that it is not optimal to completely avoid all animal foods. And for me, we can look at the menstrual cycle. A lot of women transfer themselves to a diet that's devoid of animal products. And some women lose their periods. Now, not all women do, but some women do. And so if you find, you have to look at your menstrual cycle. Your menstrual cycle is the 5th vital sign of your health and your fertility. And so your menstrual cycle is going to give you the answer to that question. I can't, every woman is different. Some women may do well on that type of a diet, but if you're wanting to optimize your fertility, the first step is to really start charting, chart your menstrual cycles, start to take a look. How long is your cycle? When is ovulation happening? How many days of mucus do you see? How long is your post-ovulatory phase? Like how many days after you ovulate till your next period? And really look at those factors. How much bleeding are you having? And that's where we start. If you're finding that your parameters are off, there are issues that are coming up, your cycle is not falling in the normal parameters, then we have to look at the diet and see if we can optimize it for fertility. And sometimes that would mean incorporating animal foods if you're open to that.
Got you. Well, we really appreciate it. I mean, you've shared so much information. Yeah, and I know that it's really going to, make a lot of women and men just aware of so many things that they had no idea about. So we really, really thank you for coming on and sharing this information and letting us interview you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure talking with the two of you. I feel like we're old friends. Like if we were in the same city, it'd be so nice to hang out and have some coffee.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, we definitely want to come to Canada. So when we're ready, we're going to reach out and we definitely got to connect.
Well, I'm here. I'm in Toronto. So
yes. So, I know that this is going to spark a lot of women to really want to work with you, follow you, look at your work. How can people work with you? What type of services do you offer?
Well, first of all, if this is all new to you and your head just exploded a little bit, that's normal. So I have a whole podcast on the topic of fertility awareness and fertility and diet and health. And so for any of you listening, the podcast, you can find it anywhere. Just search for Fertility Friday. It's an Apple podcast all over the place. And then my website is fertilityfriday.com. So I'm a fertility awareness educator and I work with women on a one-on-one basis. I also do group programs or actually bring women together based on their, how they want to use the method. So I bring groups of women together who are wanting to learn fertility awareness for birth control or for conception. and it's like a class. So we really go deep, and it's a lot of fun. So, if you are interested in that, you can always go to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. But for those of you who this is all new and you're just kind of wanting to know where to start, what resources to like what are the books, like where do I start? I created a free video series. And so if you head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAM101, so FAM 101, then you'll gain access to my free video series. I feel like that's a nice gentle introduction to this crazy world of fertility awareness.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to link those in the show notes pages as well.
Thank you.
Right. And how can people follow you via social media? Oh,
social media. So Fertility Friday, you look for the pomegranate. On Twitter, I'm at Fertile Friday. Fertility Friday was taken, so I'm at Fertile Friday. And I'm Canadian, so I say fertile. And on Facebook, I am, if you go to facebook.com/Fertility Fridays with an S. Again, it was taken, so I had to improvise. And then on Instagram, I think I got Fertility Friday on Instagram.
Nice.
Okay.
And if people want to actually, contact you directly, is that information on there, or do you have a place to send them?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, fertilityfriday.com, and you can click on the contact me button, and then you can email me there.
Nice. Thank you so much. And final question that we ask all of our guests in relation to their field, if it was one thing that you could recommend to a woman that would have the biggest impact on her health, what would that be?
Oh, that's a big question.
It's only one thing, though.
I know. I'm trying to choose wisely. I would say learn about your menstrual cycles. Mm-hmm. I would say, learn about your menstrual cycles. Start paying attention to what's happening. Start charting. It seems like it can seem like a small thing, but it opens up a whole different world. I always say, like, women come for birth control. They come to fertility. They're like, I want birth control. I want to be natural. But they leave with empowerment. They leave with a much deeper sense of the connection between their menstrual cycle, their bodies, and their health, and a much deeper understanding of what it means to be a woman in this world, because you're able to connect with that energy. So it's like the gateway drug. So start there.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, sharing this powerful information. I know it's going to help so many women at least having an awareness of the Fertility Awareness Method and what it could do for their health and well-being and for their fertility. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you again. It was my pleasure.
So that is the conclusion of our interview with Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. This is part 3 of a 3-part series of the interview that we had with Lisa. So to access the show notes pages for this episode, just go to lifestrengthandhealth.com/82 to access the show notes pages. And in there, it will list Lisa's contact information, her social media information. I will link that episode that she had on the dangers of the Depo-Provera shot, which was a very good episode, information about her podcast, and so much more. Once again, thank you, Lisa, for coming onto this show. We've received tremendous feedback from our listeners. So thank you once again for coming on to the show and spreading the word about fertility awareness, the Fertility Awareness Method. And before we go, we just want to let you know that this podcast episode was sponsored by HealthWarrior.co. HealthWarrior.co is our private health community geared towards helping you to live a more natural and holistic lifestyle with the education, training, guidance, and support that our members receive. To learn more about our membership or to join our private health community, just go to healthwarrior.co. And once again, thank you for listening to the show. We appreciate you. Until next time, live healthier. We want to say thank you for listening to the show and for access to the show notes pages, more podcast episodes, blog content, as well as more information about our center, Life Strength and Health. Then just visit us at lifestrengthandhealth.com. Until next time, live healthier.